Ladies and gentlemen, can you take your seats? Hi there, can everybody take their seats, please? Hi. Hi. Hello. Hi. Um, I know, I'm so happy for you, Steve. Welcome to the church for those of you who have not been here before, and welcome back to the church for those of you who have been here before. There's plenty of you here. It's always awesome to see familiar faces. My name is Kristen Santori. I am the programming manager here at the church, and I'm very excited. This is our first Knowledge Friday of the summer, so thank you, Ramesh, for kicking off our Knowledge Friday series of the summer. And I would just like to ask you guys if you can take a minute to silence your cell phones, please. If you need the restrooms, they are behind those walls. And I'm going to just turn it over to Ramesh, who I've had the privilege and honor of working with, and it's been a wonderful ride. So thank you.
The applause is probably undue and premature, but I think Knowledge Friday may be somewhat of a misnomer since I don't know much. And the older I get, the less I know. I'm going to talk a little bit about my own journey path, however you want to term it, and also mostly about Ram Dass and the time that we had together, and some of the time with his guru, and also my guru, because I went there to meet him. I'd like to just start by thanking April and Eric for making this great space. I don't think they're here, but it's really a cool spot that this came together. We've done some work with the art camp, which otherwise fills this space and with kids in the daytime, and been to some of the other events. And Kristen and Sherry, who have really helped us come together, and especially Kristen putting all my slides onto PowerPoint for me. And we'll see how it works. And I see my friend Loretta just walked in, who's been teaching me Photoshop, which you'll see some of the results of too. So I would really like to, I want to start with a quote, which, if I can find it, here it goes. So this is directly to the point of how this spiritual stuff works. And this is from a little booklet called the Sin Sin Ming, from the third Chinese patriarch of Zen. And Zen first went to, Buddhism went to China and was absorbed into Taoism as Chan Buddhism, when Chan became Zen in Japan. The Great Way is not difficult for those not attached to preferences, when neither love nor hate arises, or attraction and repulsion, however you want to translate that. All is clear and undisguised. Separate by the smallest amount, however, and you are as far from it as heaven is from earth. If you wish to know the truth, then hold to no opinions for or against anything. To set up what you like against what you dislike is the disease of the mind. So, good starting point. I have various hats, and we'll go into some of them. I've been a photographer for many years and been doing some writing, especially the books with Ram Dass. We did 3 together, the last being his memoir, which we finished the manuscript for just before he died at the end of 2019. And it took a while. I think that was about a 10-year project that had a lot of ups and downs and was mostly a lot of fun. And curiously, I think took him through a lot of his early life in ways that allowed him to let go of some of the harder parts of it. And probably a good process for all of us to work on. I have this view now. I'm going to see if I can get this to advance. Yeah, here we go. So I've been working with the mandala form in my photography, but this is also a lot of the way I'm seeing the path as a process of going inward and centering and becoming one, and these images are reflections mostly from nature. And I've been absorbing the basics that Ram Dass passed along starting from when I met him in 1968, and that I would say the things that he spent the most time on were identity, and later service and devotion. And I'll go into what those meant to him a little more, but the identity part really came out of his early psychology work, and the service and devotion part came from being with the guru in India, who was also, he was called Maharaji, which means great king. It's sort of an honorific that any taxi driver will apply to a tourist. Oh, Maharaj, where do you want to go? And the psychedelic part of his work, for which a lot of you know about. And so I, in my own experience, had some early teachers. And my sense is that the spiritual path is very much about point of view, so I thought I'd stick in these photographs from my ophthalmologist. This is the back of my eyeball. That's the other one. Slightly reworked in the Photoshop process, but we had fun doing that. Kristen, I like these transitions. So this is me on the beach with my mom. I grew up out here in the summers as a little kid. And, you know, my mom and dad really did instill some of the qualities that I later found were important. And they were teachers for me. This is my grandparents, and they were also, and I spent summers out here, spent a lot of time with them, and that love that came through in those early years, and then with marriage, and that's our first child over on the right there, and that's our second one. And having kids, I would say, opened my heart in a way that nothing else has, spiritual or otherwise. And this is our daughter, Anna Mirabai, who was killed in a traffic accident when she was 14, just after this was taken in East Hampton on her bike. And losing a child that way, I would say opened my heart, almost broke it. I was out working with Ramdas when she was hit by this car, and when we heard that she hadn't made it out of surgery at Stony Brook, she was airlifted to Stony Brook, and I said to Ramdas, she didn't get to finish her life. And he looked me straight in the eye and he said, yes, she did. And that, this confrontation with circumstance and what is, and having to deal is, I think, it's the guts ball part of spiritual work. It's the part that you don't get out of, no matter who you are or who you think you are. But we're all confronting that, and we're all the same in that respect. So I met Ramdas in 1968 when he first came back from India. I never knew Richard Alpert. I just met Ramdas. That's him when he was a little kid. So he had quite a major upper class or upper middle class upbringing in Massachusetts, and took degrees in psychology first at Wesleyan, where I ended up going to school and meeting him, which I didn't find out until we started working on the memoir. That's 50 years later. And at Harvard, he taught and met this character, Timothy Leary, and was introduced to psychedelics, which was the first, I think, real major change in point of view about his identity. I mean, he had gone into psychology with that in mind to find out more about who he was. And the first trip that he had on psilocybin, he went through many of the roles that he had been living, from professor to cello player to teacher and all of the rest. And eventually he looked down and discovered he had no body. And he was just this consciousness, this awareness. And over the years after that, he and Leary got kicked out of Harvard for ostensibly giving psychedelics to an undergraduate, which they weren't supposed to do. And those stories have many permutations, of course. But at the time, it seemed like a catastrophe in terms of his Boston upbringing, and everybody thought being a Harvard professor was about the epitome of an honorable profession, and later he thought of it as the best thing that had ever happened to him. From Harvard, they moved to an estate that belonged to the Hitchcock family in Millbrook, New York. And they continued their psychedelic researches in, let's say, a non-academic environment. But after more than 300 psychedelic trips, and many of them guiding other people, Ramdas was starting to experience the basic problem of using those medicines, as they're thought of now, which is you come down. And the coming down got to be problematic. He could not stabilize his awareness in that deeper place. Later he got a different perspective on psychedelics, and he never put them down. He always honored that time. So he went off to India in 1967 with a friend who had sold an early education software company to Xerox and gotten a bunch of money, and they outfitted a Land Rover, which you can see here, and had it shipped to Tehran. It was right after the '67 war, so they didn't really want to drive through parts of the Middle East. So it got shipped to Tehran. They finally got it out of customs, and they started driving. They drove across Iran and Afghanistan and through Pakistan into India and ended up in Kathmandu. I think that earlier one was the Khyber Pass, by the way. So this is along the route. And they had some pretty great adventures along the way. And part of Ram Dass' mission, if you want to call it that, on this trip was to find out what these psychedelic substances were really about. And they gave acid to a number of people along the way, and they tried to see if anybody really knew. And finally, when they got to Kathmandu and Ram Dass' travel partner was ready to leave, he was going on to Japan from Nepal to meet Gary Snyder, and he had another arrangement, and they met this young hippie surfer sadhu from California who Ram Dass decided that this guy had something going, and he decided to go on a walking pilgrimage with him, which he did for some weeks. And toward the end of that pilgrimage, this guy was called Bhagwan Das, that was his Hindi name, said, my visa's up and I have to go see my guru to get it fixed. So they drove the Land Rover up into the Himalaya foothills, which you're looking at, and went to this little temple up in the Himalayas, of which this is a more modernized version, I guess. And they met this gentleman wrapped in a blanket, and Ram Dass had this opening with him, which is, he's described starting in Be Here Now, and we went into extensively, but in the memoir. But essentially what happened, Ram Dass had been out under the stars the night before and had been thinking about his mother, who had died 6 months before, and he didn't tell anyone about it. And he gets to Maharaji, and Maharaji says, you were out under the stars last night? You were thinking about your mother? And she died recently, didn't she? Ram Dass had not really come to terms with that death. He and his mother had had a very complicated and close relationship, and her death, he had not really had the time to mourn. And Maharaji said to him, how did she die? She died of spleen, and he said spleen in English, which he was not supposed to speak. But something cracked in Ram Dass at that point, and he broke down, and his heart opened, and he cried and cried. And that opening led to a kind of trust with the guru. And he went on to take Maharaji's instruction, and he stayed in the ashram in the Himalayas for 6 months through the winter of 67 into 68, studying yoga and meditation. This is meditating in the snow outside the temple, and essentially learning to be a renunciate yogi. And in the full kind of sense of what's sometimes called Raj Yoga or Ashtanga Yoga, meaning all of the 8 limbs of yoga, starting with the do's and don'ts and asana, pranayama, and going through to deep meditation. And he learned meditation for the first time, really. And his original translator was a wonderful character from the nearby village who he got to know and used to come to the temple and bring him special food and books and really take care of him, and felt that was kind of his mission. His name was KK, or Krishna Kumar. And we later came to know him also. He's a very sweet man, and came from a family who were devotees of saints for generations. Saints being the characterization in India of high beings or yogis, or maybe what we think of as realized beings, or he lost a bit of weight in the process. Maharaji was considered by many to be a siddha, which is a term for a yogi that has kind of finished the course. And he was also called Neem Karoli Baba, which is the name of a train station. And there's a story about that, of course. Ram Dass also became familiar with some of the other saints through KK and his teacher, and through being in India. This is Ramana Maharshi, Anandamayi Ma, who was a Bengali housewife who started going into extraordinary states when she was quite young, and ended up being carried around like a statue of the goddess in her later years. Her husband became her disciple. She'd roll around on the kitchen floor and dinner would burn. This is Ramakrishna, who many of you know about, whose disciple Vivekananda came to the, it was 1897 or something, and there was a big World Congress of Religions in Chicago. And he gave this speech he was quite well educated, but he essentially introduced yoga into the West. And this is a hill saint named Sambari Baba. Sambari means Monday. And he fed people on Mondays. People would just come to his little ashram, and he would have a small pot on the fire, and it would feed hundreds of people. This is another one of the hill saints who was supposed to be able to fly. And he's interestingly carrying a Tibetan prayer wheel there also. So at the end of this course in yoga, Maharaji said Ram Dass should go back to the States, and Ram Dass said, I don't feel pure enough to go back yet. And Maharaji had him stand up and turn around, and he looked at him and said, I don't see any impurity. So he gets back to Logan Airport wearing his white robes, and his father meets him wearing his cashmere overcoat and his fedora and the Cadillac, and says, "Quick, get in the car. Don't let anybody see you." So he mostly stayed up at the family's farm in New Hampshire, which is where that previous photo was from. And he did start giving some talks. I was at Wesleyan still at the time. I guess I was a sophomore. And when he had done his MA there, he'd been a student, a teaching assistant, and some of his students were by then psychology professors at Wesleyan, and they invited him to come speak there. And he got the invitation in India at the ashram. But that was the first talk that he gave when he came back from India, and it was in a student lounge at Wesleyan, and everybody's expecting Dr. Psychedelic from Harvard, and this guy walks in a white robe, barefoot in the frozen mud of March in Connecticut, and long beard, and started talking about psychology and psychedelics and yoga, and putting them together. And he spoke from 7 or 7:30 in the evening until 3 in the morning. And after a while, somebody turned out the lights, and there was just this voice in the darkness, and people would ask questions. And when I got to India a couple years later, I realized that the guru had come through him at that time. I mean, I had had what's called darshan, which translates literally as view, at that time. I mean, it was the same feeling getting to be with this old man in the blanket as had occurred on that evening. I can't explain any of this, don't ask. So Ram Dass did start giving more talks, and whoops, that was the one backwards. That's back up at the farm, and he built this sort of little nest up in the attic. And as the weather improved, people started coming up on the weekends to visit. And his father had this sort of 3-hole golf course out on this part of the farm. And people sat out on the golf course, and Ram Dass gave lectures about whatever. And he taught yoga, and there were probably 15 or 20 people people who, like me, who were really trying to figure this out, who camped out there for the summer. And his father, who's there, let us build a structure up on the hill so he could speak when the weather was inclement also. We did Sufi dancing on the golf course. And that's the bathing pavilion. Then in the 1969, Ram Dass gave a series of talks at a sculpture studio in New York, which became the basis for the Be Here Now book, which many of you probably know about or have encountered. It became kind of the backpacker's Bible for many years. And at the end of the series of talks, I think he spoke for 10 days or 2 weeks or something like that, and a woman came up to him and said, hi, my name's Lillian North. I'm a court stenographer, and I recorded your talks, and I've transcribed them all. And here's the manuscript. And she handed him a stack of typescripts. And he put them in the back of his 38 Buick and drove to California to Esalen to do a seminar there. And Big Sur. And he stayed with a writer named John Bleibtreu and his wife, Caddy. and they're unloading his luggage, and John sees the pile of manuscripts in the back and says, "What's that?" And Ram Dass told him, and he said, "Can I take a look?" So he went through the manuscript while Ram Dass was giving the seminar at Esalen, and he just annotated the pieces that he thought were the strongest parts of it. And when Ram Dass was leaving, he gave it back to him and said, "I think you got something here." So from Esalen, Ram Dass went to, this is Lama Foundation in New Mexico, which was a commune that he helped start with Steve Durkee and forgetting the other person's name, but this was up at about 9,000 feet north of Taos, New Mexico, looking out at what had been the sea bottom, I guess, some millennia before that. This incredible view, and this, it was a commune formed to be an eclectic mix of all kinds of spiritual practices and teachers. And it worked for a while. But at that time, Steve was helping Ram Dass unload, and he saw the pile of manuscripts, and he said, "What's that? And can I take a look?" So Steve was a rather extraordinary artist, and there were a number of other artists at the commune. And after going through the manuscript and selecting pieces of it, members of the commune undertook to do drawings and artwork, and eventually they made a manuscript which I have characterized to some people as sort of an early graphic novel, but it was a spiritual manual. And there were different pieces of the box, including a cookbook for spiritual life and references for things to read and practices. And it was called From Bindu to Ojas, an incomprehensible title, which means from the seed to the light, essentially. And they made about, I think, 5,000 copies and hand assembled them, and then they distributed them for free from, it was called the Bountiful Lord's Delivery Service. And Ram Dass used the money from the lectures that he was giving to pay for the production and the distribution, and that was that. And then they ran out. And a guy had come up to him when he was doing the lectures in New York and said, "I'm in publishing. If you ever want to do a book, I'd love to help." So they called this guy, whose name was Bruce Harris, and he worked for Crown Publishing. But it turned out he was a salesman, not actually an editor. But he came down, and they spread out the parts of the main book, which were on 2-by-4-foot pages of butcher paper. And they'd been hand-drawn and lettered with rubber stamps. And somewhere or other, those are still in existence. But Bruce took one of the boxes back to his publisher in New York, who was the owner of Crown. It's before they all merged into Random House or whatever. And he said, "This is a really important work, and I think we should publish it." And the publisher, who was his mentor and had really coached him along the way, and he's a young guy at the time, said, well, I'll show it to the chief editor, and we'll see what he says. And the chief editor looked at it and said, "There's all this drug stuff in here. I don't think you should touch this with a 10-foot pole." And Bruce said to the publisher, his mentor, "Well, I think we should publish this, but we could just distribute it, or I'm going to quit. And he put his job on the line. And they did agree, they did it as a distribution rather than a publishing deal. And the copyright went to Lama Foundation, which has subsisted on the royalties from Be Here Now over many decades since then. And Ram Dass did not take any of the royalties. This is Ram Dass at Lama Foundation around that time. No, this was later because he didn't have the big beard. So Ram Dass headed back to India, and that's me on the right. He came with Swami Muktananda, who many of you have heard about probably, who was started something called Siddha Yoga, which was a big thing in the West for a while. And he used Ram Dass as kind of his front man on his first tour around the States. And there's another story about that, but we don't have time. And it took a while to find Maharaji because Ram Dass had delayed his schedule coming back, and he didn't get back until mid-November. And Maharaji had left the hills and was nowhere to be found at that time. And either they didn't know or they wouldn't tell us where he'd gone. So about 30 of us went off to, we'd heard about the Vipassana course in Bodh Gaya, where the Buddha got enlightened, and we went to Bodh Gaya and studied with a teacher named Goenka, who was quite a marvelous Vipassana teacher who was just starting out teaching at that time. And he was teaching these 10-day meditation courses, and we took 4 in a row. Well, let me go back to that. It's not going back. Doesn't matter. There we go. So eventually, we ran into Maharaji, or he arranged to meet us. Another story. We started seeing him again, and this is the first copy of Be Here Now, having been sent to India. And he had a couple of corrections to make, but otherwise it went down pretty well. And by then, a number of Westerners had accrued around Ram Dass coming and hearing about Maharaji, even though Ram Dass had been told not to speak about Maharaji when he went back to the West, and it's probably about all he did talk about. But he didn't say where he was or what his name was or any of that, but people figured it out. And he bought a VW van from some other hippies, and we used it as kind of a taxi going back and forth to the temple from the nearby town. And this is a photo of the crew, some of them, some of whom you'll know. Krishna Das, who does chanting, is next to Ram Dass, and Danny Goleman, who wrote Emotional Intelligence, is in the front row, just in front of the picture of Maharaji, and a lot of other characters, some of whom are still alive and some of whom have passed. One of the people that we encountered just in passing at the temple was a woman who had been a householder and had left her home after her husband died, and her children left home and started their own lives. And she came and lived at the ashram and kind of took care of Maharaji's food and needs, and she was quite an amazing woman, and she took care of the ashram after he died. She was called Siddhima, which is like Siddha, as you might get. It means perfected, and she was just a source of deep, deep love and caring for all of the devotees. She was like the mother for many people. This is the little cottage, kuti, it was called, a retreat place out in the hills where one of those saints that we saw earlier stayed for many years. And Ram Dass we would read from the holy books. This is probably from the Ramayana, I think, at the temple or at the Maharaji would ship us back to the hotel in the town, and we would have to stay there and not be allowed to come every day to the temple. Tried to keep us out of his hair, and at one point he sent us off to do a retreat during the monsoon, way up in the mountains. This is Ram Dass, I think, on PCP. Some things were still being experimented with along the way. And this is Bhagwan Das and his Ram Dass yoga teacher, Hari Das Baba, who came to the States and had a retreat at Mount Madonna in California for many years. That's me in my holy mode. So we got a number of us, including me. I had gone on a 3-month tourist visa to India and got kicked out after a year and a half. And I got what's called a quit India notice, which means you better leave now or you're never going to be allowed back. So I went back through, I went across the Pacific. Most people went through London. And we got together back in the States, and I worked on a project with Ram Dass, which was an 8-disc collection called Love, Serve, Remember, which included a reading from that third Chinese patriarch and a bunch of other stuff. He had done a series of all-night radio shows on WBAI in New York that were recorded, and some of that material made it onto the record. But at one point, we got a telegram that said Maharaji has dropped his bojai, which was a mistype of dropped his body, and he had died. And this was unexpected and a shock. And by the time we got back to India, this is what we saw, a pile of ashes. I like this photograph as one that is sort of the form and the formless of Maharaji dissolving into light. And it was, his presence did not go away. That's all I can say. Weird. But this mystery of life and death and how things transmute or transpire or transmigrate is one we all get to deal with. And this was the crew assembled at Ram Dass farm just after that we got that news. And his friend KK was visiting from India at that point. This was 1973, I think. And Ram Dass became quite a bit more active in social action causes. He helped start this, what you're seeing here is from the Seva Foundation. Seva means selfless service, and this was a group that came together from doctors who had worked in the smallpox eradication program in India, and hippies, and Ram Dass. And Wavy Gravy was one of them, from the Hog Farm commune in California. And he was running his Nobody for President campaign, which we could probably use a reprise of. This is an early Seva board meeting. And on the left is Larry Brilliant, who is also in this photo. Larry was one of the founders of Seva, and he had worked, he'd gone to see Maharaji in India, and Maharaji told him to go work on the smallpox eradication program. And he went into the office, the World Health Organization in Delhi that was running the project, and with a hippie doctor with a ponytail. He was a doctor. He had been heading up the first aid and the Alcatraz occupation, I think, among other things. But they took one look at him and said, "No, you're not going to be part of this." And he goes back, and Maharaji said, "Go back again." So that happened 4 or 5 times, and finally they kind of took note of his persistence and said, "Well, maybe we can use you in the education part of the operation." He ended up being the second in command for the smallpox eradication program in India, which India and Bangladesh was the last place there was smallpox on the planet. It's one of the only major diseases like that that's been eradicated. The other detail about this is that this was one of the early Apple computers that Steve Jobs donated, and they were doing the epidemiology analysis in Kathmandu for a blindness program, which was the beginning of Seva's medical work. In 1997, early in 97, Ram Dass was working on a new book called Still Here, and he had a stroke. And it was a bleed in the brain, not a blockage. And he wasn't found for some hours, and he almost died. It was, they didn't really expect him to survive. But he did, and he spent the next 22 years in a wheelchair. His right side was paralyzed. He had aphasia for considerable time, and still, had it through most of his life. And for somebody who really, whose life depended on the gift of gab and telling stories, and he was a master storyteller, as many of you experienced. This was a tough road, and it was amazing to be with him in those later years. And it was, he did make it back to India once in 2004 when Kate and I took our kids to India, who were 5 and 7 at the time. And I think Ram Dass thought, well, if they can take those little kids there, I can get there in the wheelchair. And he did. And this is with Siddhima, and sitting in the back of the temple next to Maharaji's chair. And he went back from India to California briefly, stayed overnight, and went to Maui to lead a retreat that had been scheduled months before. And at the end of the retreat, he came down with a severe infection. I think it was from a UTI he'd picked up in India, and it had gone septic, and that almost took him out too. He was hospitalized for a month and couldn't travel afterwards. And friends got together and helped him get settled in Maui, and he basically lived out the rest of his life there. And eventually we started setting up retreats. And a few years later, when he was 79, he got a letter from someone who said, I think my brother may be your son. And as it turned out, to make it shorter, they did some DNA testing, and it was his son. He had had a liaison at Stanford with then another graduate student, and she hadn't told him that she was pregnant. She married somebody else, and this occurred. His son at that point was, I think, 53. So for someone who had been a renunciate on the spiritual path, who was as detached as one could be, living in the West in the world, suddenly he's a family man. And it took him through some changes, but for the better. And they ended up having quite a lovely relationship. His son likes to play golf, and while he was still able, Ram Dass, when he would come out to Hawaii, he would ride around with his son on the golf cart, on the golf course. And so they had a sweet relationship, although, clearly he had missed a lot of the process. His name is Peter. He's a very sweet guy. And Mondays in Maui were beach day. Everybody packed up and went to the beach on the side where the waves were calm. And Ram Dass getting in the water meant that the effects of the stroke, all those limitations kind of floated away because he was weightless in the water. And he just loved being in the ocean. It was a real gift. So I was back and forth working with him because after the stroke he really needed help with writing, and we put together 3 book projects together, and the last one being the memoir. And the closeness that had started back from 1968 had persisted through a lot of ups and downs and bumps in the road and changes for both of us. The love that had come from Maharaji originally persisted also in Ram Dass. And toward the end, when he was not as verbal, that was what he transmitted. And the meditations and what he gave to people was just what he would say, love and awareness. Love and awareness. And that sense of unconditional love that had come through the Guru originally was coming through Ram Dass. He was transmitting that, and people felt it. And we were running these retreats in Maui for 5 days around just after Thanksgiving every year. And it was just a kind of love fest. And Ram Dass would talk sometimes, but not much. And we had quite wonderful Buddhist teachers that brought that wisdom side to the teaching as well, and Krishna Das leading chanting every evening. It was a very sweet time to be together. And we also laughed a lot. This is a day or two before he died. And I don't know, I like this photo a lot. It's just an odd one. That's the cover photo from the memoir, which this one's doctored a little bit more than the one on the book cover, but we had fun with that. So I felt like he really was absorbed back into that place that is the guru. The guru thing is a really hard thing to communicate in the West, and Ram Dass used to note that because the guru is, often perceived as someone that you might have to give up your power to, your individuality, and there's all this stuff about surrender, and there are people like Rajneesh who were driving all these Rolls Royces around, and there was a young guru who's got into trouble with the IRS, and there's all this craziness and some sexual hanky-panky, and a lot of issues that came up along the way. So there was also the Maharaji was said to be an incarnation of this Indian monkey god named Hanuman, who is the embodiment of service and devotion. And that was where a lot of the sense of devotion, which is that practice in India is called bhakti, or that's the devotional practice. And in our case, it went along with Buddhist wisdom practice, and I think that combination of opening the heart and figuring it out work well together. So I think at this point I want to open this to questions, and I'm going to thumb through some of my photographs as we do that. So I think Kristen has a microphone. Raise your hand if you want to ask anything, and you can ask me anything. This photo is an early tree mandala, whatever you want to call it, that went in a record album in 1973, and this was literally cut and pasted. That's an early one also, I think, from the radio tower in Napeague. Questions? Sorry, get the mic.
Two questions. One, with how psychedelics are coming back medically, and there's a lot of research around microdosing and things, what might have happened, do you think, or would you speculate, or did he speculate at all about what might have been if Leary hadn't, gone so off the rails there at Harvard? And my second question is, I've heard you talk in the past about the 5-limb yoga versus the 8-limb, and which is one of its like gossip or something. And could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, let's start with that one. The 5-limbed yoga was coined by one of Neem Karoli's devotees, and it is the 5-limbed yoga is eating, sleeping, drinking tea, gossiping, and walking about. So that gives you a flavor of what our activities were like around the guru. And one of one of Maharaji's things was feeding people. And he would feed the villagers around the temple. The kids would come in after school and get tea and sweets, and probably too many sweets. But when I first arrived there, they fed us puris and potatoes, which was sort of the staple diet. Puris are deep-fried bread and fried in ghee and butter. And the potatoes were quite spicy and, really well-flavored. So I remember eating 17 puris and 3 huge piles of potatoes and beginning to get grounded. And as to the psychedelic side of it, Ram Dass kept in touch with some of the people who were doing the psychedelic research, and there were some ongoing exchanges with some of the folks at Johns Hopkins and NYU, and University of Minnesota. I'm not sure where. There was another group doing that work. And there were a couple of colloquiums at Ram Dass House about that. He stayed in touch with Ralph Metzner until his passing. So he definitely was keeping an eye on that. I think that, in his own identity search, I think that he felt he had, I don't know if he felt that, but he'd clearly gone beyond that phase of his work with psychedelics. I mean, he did honor them and use them from time to time just to check in. At one point, he was working with this doctor in Maui who was doing Chinese medicine with him and acupuncture, and who said, "Look, I'm working on your brain. I can't do it when you're, smoking weed." So he stopped. And there was no negative thing about it. And there are the stories of his giving LSD to Maharaji on 2 occasions. And basically, he gave him very large doses, like enough for 4 people, and nothing happened. So that was an indication, I think, that that phase was done for him. And I love the quote from, there's one from Alan Watts, which is, "When you get the message, hang up the phone." That's my take on it. That's not Ram Dass. Hey, John.
Hi, how are you? You started to talk a little bit about the guru principle, I guess, and you were just began that thought, and what it meant for Maharaji to be the guru, or what the guru principle really.
Yeah, I think it's
carries
useful to think of
forward.
it more as a function than a person or personality. The literal meaning of guru is remover of darkness. And my sense is that a guru is someone who knows you from the inside out, can reflect your innermost being back to you. And that is that process. And at some point, there's the guru's grace is actually sort of considered a spiritual path. And basically what that is taking everything that comes your way as a manifestation of that teaching, what you have to work with. So instead of, getting bummed out by stuff that doesn't go your way, or feeling inflated from, I'm the center of attention, right? So my ego is getting inflated from speaking in front of a bunch of people. But in that way, those inflation and deflation parts of how our personality, kind of holds on to things, get less relevant. And that when there's that view, that darshan experience that I was talking about, and it happens, it's not necessarily personality. I mean, when we sit together on Zoom, there's a presence, and it's all of our collective intention and consciousness, and dwelling in a common awareness together. And that's part of that too. I mean, it's not, this is what I mean, it's hard to get across.
Thank you.
Anyway, it's basically about love.
I'm thinking of walking each other home, and I've forgotten things and remembered things, and there I am. But the conscious dying, what shall I call it, initiative? Where is that now? Or can you speak to that in general?
Well, first of all, being with Ram Dass when he died was a primal experience for me. And he was the least afraid of death of anyone I have ever met. And he was actively reading about near-death experiences and after-death experiences that people reported back from. And that said, his death was still a very human, physical process. I think that my sense was that his consciousness actually had left while his body was still like gasping for air at the end of his life. But there was a presence after he had stopped, after his body had stopped, that was clearly happening. And the view that came through the time in India of multiple incarnations and, oh, sorry, I'm going to keep doing this if I remember to, but that sense that of understanding what is about karma, which is the result of all of our actions and births and going from one to the next. I remember a Zen story that this Zen master was asked about, what's your opinion about reincarnation? And he slammed his hand down on the table and said, it's not an opinion, it's a fact. So, you take that however it works for you, but I don't think you can understand karma, the interaction of our behavior and our relationships and our actions and their consequences and how you feel about things without having some of that perspective that there is continuity. Continuity of what? I don't think it's our thinking mind. But in the Indian version of that is that there are what are called sanskaras, which are the subtle traces in our psyche of this and that. And that is what transmigrates into the next body. And we keep doing it until we're done. And that's the interesting part of the Buddha experience, that he penetrated to the place where he no longer needed to keep working on it. I'm forgetting to push the button. I'll keep pushing. It's the big duck. I saw them moving that down the road at one point. Okay, the train station story is that he was living in this little village called Neem Karoli, or Neem Karori, there are different pronunciations, and he gets, has to go somewhere, so he goes out to the closest train station, and he gets on the train and he sits down in the first class compartment. And the conductor comes by and he doesn't have a ticket. So the conductor throws him off the train. And he sits down on the platform and the train won't move. And they try to, everything they can think of to get it to go. And they even bring another engine eventually. Train's not moving. And one of the other railway officials sees Maharaji sitting on the platform and says, who threw him off the train? Put him back on. But Maharaji refuses to get on until they bring him sweets and tea. And then he also says, you have to promise to make a train station, a train stop at Neem Karori. So the railway officials agree finally, not much choice. And off goes the train. Maharaji sits down in the first class compartment and off they go. So he was called Neem Karoli Baba after that. It's, sort of the way things happen in a magical reality culture like India, I guess. Thank you. I've been having fun, as you can tell. Yeah. Yeah, it's nice to see them big. I really appreciate the big screen. Julia.
Thank you. Thank you, Ramesh. That was so good. So I don't know if I can ask this clearly. It's about the guru principle and how much of it do you think is individual karma and how much do you think it's the catalyst of the actual guru? And how much do you think, like, if one wanted to find a living saint, if one wanted to have that experience now, do you think there are people in India or here or sitting right next to me or wherever who are transmitting? And if there were, how much of it would be me and how much of it would be them?
Yes. I think those beings are always present, whether we can find them or not. But the finding, I think, is about your work, your inner work on yourself also. You know, I mean, that desire for clarity, identity, oneness, love are what carry one onto some kind of spiritual path or practice. And I don't understand karma. That's very clear to me that I don't understand it. But clearly there are karmic relationships like that. Like Maharaji there was one devotee that he would whack on the head and the guy would go into samadhi. Stop breathing, body goes rigid, gone. And then he'd whack him on the head again and he'd come back. And he said, I can do that because we've been together for many lifetimes. So that's in the go figure department. But the guru, the guru is an inner place. It's not necessarily an outer being. You don't need to have an external guru or teacher. You may or may not have that encounter in the body. You might have it on an astral or spiritual level directly. I don't know. I mean, I don't think there's a way of saying.
Ramesh, we have one more question over here.
Mm. Hi.
Hey, as I heard you speaking, I kept thinking a lot of Ram Dass's background and his timeline aligned with Alan Watts a lot. And
Yeah.
I believe Alan Watts also started in a university setting in psychology as well. And then you mentioned him, and you also mentioned a quote of his that I love, that I think about a lot, and it kind of pops in at certain times in my life, that exact quote.
Mm.
Did you witness them have interactions, or did they ever seek each other out? I don't know if there was, it seems like they were almost the same age, but it could be a 10-year difference. I'm not sure.
I think Alan Watts was a bit older, but Ram Dass said that when he was at Stanford, he used to drive up to San Francisco, and on Sunday mornings, Alan Watts had a radio show. And that was his, first introduction to Eastern philosophy. And then later when they were at Harvard, and they were doing the psychedelic work, Alan Watts came and took several trips with them, and eventually he wrote a book about some of his experiences. I think it's called The Joyous Cosmology. And Leary and Alpert wrote the foreword for it. So they did have this interaction, which actually is continuing. The Ram Dass Foundation has a podcast network called the Be Here Now Network. And Alan Watts' son is now allowing his father's talks to be part of the podcast network through the Ram Dass Foundation. So yes, there are close relationships. And I know Ram Dass used to visit him on the houseboat in Marin. That's fun. That's a field in Washington State. Thank you for coming.